my favorite work of fiction and a great piece of literature was The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. And then the other two books were nonfiction books. They were Drive by Daniel Pink and Bringing Up Baby by Pamela Druckerman. And each of the two books were fantastic, and I read so many books that as I came back to my high school students and were telling them about some of the things I learned, they're like, "Holy wow, these are amazing." I'm like, and so lots of the books contained fantastic information, but those two were unique in their own way for sort of how it changed my perspective on how I saw things.
Okay, now with The Fault in Our Stars, tell me why that kind of grabbed you the most of all the fiction you read this year.
Well, first, the author John Green, I was made aware of him through his Crash Course World History video that he made for YouTube, and he's one half of the Vlog Brothers, one of the most popular YouTube video. He and his brother do it. And I thought he was really witty and interesting and intelligent, and I kept seeing my students with the book, Fault in Our Stars, and I was like, "What is this book?" And they're like, "Oh, Miss Bovey, it's amazing, you have to read it." And so I decided, why not? And downloaded it, and from the very first page, I was surprised that John wrote our main character as a female. Oftentimes, male authors don't do that. They take their protagonist as a male point of view and have female characters, of course, but the fact that Hazel is written from him, and she's a 16-year-old girl with terminal illness, and there's no even, you know she's going to die. I mean, the book doesn't take us there, but she's got a terminal illness that just happens to be in a holding pattern right now because of the medication that she's on. But she's an only child, her parents have devoted their entire life to trying to save her, and as long as possible. And as much as she doesn't want to do it, she starts going to this cancer support group, and that's where she meets the boy that she ends up falling in love with, which is Augustus. And he was an athlete and had a form of cancer that, you know, he got one of his legs amputated. But at the moment, he's healthy and he's fine, and he's been going to this group. And the two of them, Hazel is already in college. She's in community college. She graduated from high school early at 16 and is very intelligent. And because she spent so many years of her life sick, she's very introspective and very deep. And Augustus happens to, even though he might not have the same, I guess, level of intelligence as she does, gets her deepness. And she is so in love with this one particular book. And she's like, "You have to read it." And he gives her like these nasty, gritty crime, and he's like, the point-and-shoot video games is his thing. And she starts to read these books that sort of go along with the video game series that he's totally into, and he reads her book. And her book is one of those, like the author of the book, it's not a real book, but the author of the book just ended it. Like, the story doesn't end, it just stops. And so her life's dream is to like find out what happened to these characters that she's read the book countless number of times, and Augustus decides to use his one wish, you know, like, because cancer kids get their one wish from the Miracle Network or whatever, and to go to Amsterdam to try to meet the author. And when they travel to Amsterdam, and even though against doctor's orders that she goes because she's not healthy, she has, the cancer has weakened her lungs so much that she's always on oxygen. And it is not a happy trip because the author turns out to be an alcoholic and a complete jackass, and you know, it sort of breaks her heart that this is what happens. And this is the second stage of the story, and I'm not going to say what happens to these two characters, but this trip changes the nature of their relationship as well. And I think from the time that they go to Amsterdam, I think I had tears streaming down my face the rest of the book. And you know, even though cancer is sort of a secondary character in the story, it is not what the story is about. It is not about two sick kids. It's about the relationship that they have with each other and the relationship of how they see the world. And that's what, you know, like, it's a tragic story ultimately. Like, it is sad and heartbreaking, and I love sad material. I like things, and I like authors that force me to feel something. And so movies that have that element, or television or books, that get me to really like immerse myself into characters that feel so real that I'm shedding tears because of the tragedy of their life. That's what made this book so beautiful. And although it's written for teenagers, I mean, it's a young adult fiction, it's a book that I think anyone could really appreciate. And it's a work of literature. It's not just a work of fiction. It's not just a story. And that's what, I mean, John Green has really elevated himself. The vocabulary and the weaving of the stories and all of that, like, it was really just a masterful story, and it was a great book.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, which of the characters you think in the book kind of allow the audience to really understand the story the best? Is it through Hazel's eyes, or do you understand Hazel better as you see how Augustus sees her, or is there anything like that that kind of draws you into the book a little bit deeper? Because that's a very effective tool if an author's good at it. How do you think he did a good job of that?
Well, and he does it both ways, because the story is told from Hazel's perspective the entire time. But at the end, there's this beautiful tribute from Augustus about how he sees Hazel.
Okay.
And that is beautiful as well, because you see and understand the depth of his feelings for her. And I know sometimes adults especially don't think that teenagers can love each other or have a meaningful, deep relationship because they're not old enough to have
the life experience
right,
outside of this
right.
relationship.
But I think children that have gone through such suffering at such a young age, it makes you grow up. It makes you deal with things that lots of adults haven't even had to deal with. And I that's what I liked about the relationship between these two characters. They were still teenagers. I mean, they still acted as teenagers and all of that stuff. But it was elevated to a level of intelligence and depth and warmth that, like I said, it was just a masterful book and one of the best works of fiction I've read in years, not just in 2012. It was that good.
Okay, well, I'll absolutely have to read that this year then. So that's going to be on my list to read this year.